Welcome to Last Week On, the podcast where we take our favorite TV shows, movies, and just everything at this point, and we go back through them. My name is Adam Strawn, and I am joined yet again on this trip through The Last of Us by the one and only Mr. Joey Dean. How are you doing, Joey?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. Just like this week's just been a massive rush, and we were just catching up there before kind of we hit record, and just we've both had a lot on, I guess. But it's nice to come back and talk all about this incredible moving episode of the Last of Us. And I'm sure that we both kind of had the same emotional reaction to it as well, right?
Yeah, especially this week, super busy as as you've just noted. And then to move into this episode, which was so slow yet so moving, to rewatch it, it was like the necessary pause that I needed. But it was definitely an emotional roller coaster.
Oh my God, absolutely.
Just as bad the second time.
If for me, kind of even worse. Like I was saying, obviously before we hit record, like me and my partner were watching it this morning before coming to do this, and just again, I was like, oh my God, I feel like more emotional now, like knowing what's going to happen. So it hit me again. But so we are talking about episode 3, which is long time. Now, to start off like straight away, this is very much where the show has kind of pivoted and it's doing its own thing from the game. We've been told about in the previous episodes, get Ellie to Bill and Frank's. We've heard their names mentioned, but we've never actually kind of met them until this. Now, in the video game, obviously you meet Bill and kind of you do like stuff with him. You kind of work your way towards you see the effects of some of his traps as well. And like all of this, you never meet Frank. But you do see a note that's left from Frank for Bill. And obviously, we'll talk about that a little bit later on when we get to the note that's been left. But yeah, like this pivot from the video game to what they did in the TV show. I mean, briefly, Joey, what's kind of your general thoughts going in?
I think the first time watching it through, because the backstory is so highlighted, whereas aside from the opening of episode 1, the episodes are interspersed, if you will, with backstory. So you kind of have this ebb and flow of a storyline or a space or a visual or a character dynamic that we recognize from the game, and then there's a backstory paired with it, and there's this back and forth. Whereas this episode was a deviation from that structure in that it was exclusively backstory, and a backstory to a character that we don't know a lot about. And so it was nice. I thought it was a really great way to use the art form of television and cinematic storytelling to expand upon something in a very different way. And I think the deviation wasn't as significant watching it back at the second time, because in retrospect, it is essentially the same story of Bill and Frank, contrary to what I would guise as homophobic rhetoric that came out after this episode. I don't think that it was wildly different, because the whole nature of the show so far is providing backstory expositions for the characters that we don't know as much about. But up until this point, the momentum of the show has been a little bit faster because the exposition is setting up the entirety that is The Last of Us for a viewership that hasn't played the game, and also establishing the variations for a viewership that has played the game. But with this situation, because Bill and Frank's narrative is pretty open-ended, it's one of those things in the game we have to piece together through information, through X, Y, Z. However, with this episode, it filled in those open spots with a lot more beauty and poetry and storyline. And theoretically, to me, it wasn't wildly different from what has happened so far, because it's a backstory. Nothing was changed about these characters except for the fact that Bill and Frank in this version don't split. Frank doesn't leave out of impatience, frustration, wanting to expose himself to the outside world. But Frank and Bill have a dynamic within the show in which Frank does want contact with the outside world and Bill doesn't. And that dynamic is very much present in the game. It's very much present in this. So I really didn't find it so incredibly different.
Yeah, I think that's, there's a lot of in there what you said, is brilliantly put in the sense that, we get hints of the backstory, but this is like filling in those gaps, and that's exactly right. And, I think rather than kind of reading just a single note and then being like, oh, were they? We get that answer straight away. And then we get to explore that whole relationship. And as well, by doing the relationship and by us allowing to see the relationship like this blossom, it goes in line with the themes that the last two episodes have already set up. So if it just followed the narrative of the video game, it would feel like a massive loss and a little bit jarring compared to what we've already seen. Like this kind of the whole themes of like losing humanity, getting humanity back, you going on a personal journey, you changing in some way because somebody's come into your life. All of this has been set up in the last two episodes, so it only made sense to further explore that narrative and those kind of metaphor and everything that's been set up there.
Yeah.
And a lot of the complaints about this episode, which I read about and I find hilarious because for me it's bullshit, is these people that are saying, it's a zombie show, it's all about zombies, blah, 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 blah. And then this episode, like, had, no zombies, which correction, it did have one, but well, technically two.
Technically
but
two, yeah.
The whole game is about humanity. It's about that human story between two people who didn't know each other, who come together in these unfortunate circumstances, but build a relationship. And that is exactly what you get in this episode. So for people to say that, this episode stands out for negative reasons because it's not about zombies is to completely misunderstand what The Last of Us is even about. Like,
yeah,
completely.
I mean, look at the title of the show. Obviously, it's referencing The Last of Us, i.e., the last of humanity, but there's a much deeper meaning there, which is what is left, the last of us, what is left when the world is gone, when the infrastructure of society is no more. What do we have? And this episode was a deep exploration of that. And there's a lot of, if you will, subterranean imagery, a lot of underground imagery in this episode, from the gas station moment where Ellie goes underground to find the tampons and the infected. And then you have Bill, whose origin story is rooted in a bunker, which is underground. And then he meets Frank in a hole. It's a lot of this idea of this forced imagery and metaphor of what is beneath. And that is, I think, so pertinent to the point of the show. And I think that's why they're adding those subtle hints. And it also makes sense that Bill would be a closeted homosexual, or at least the imagery would be put in this episode, because that is a part of his humanity that is left. That is what is the last of him. That is something that he still has, despite society and all that external stuff not being there anymore. So that is what he has. That is the last of him. That is the last of us. Yeah. So I don't know. I thought people who were complaining were showing their ass.
Yeah, basically. Absolutely. Yeah. Showing their ass for what it is. But you're right. Like that. It is, The Last of Us has so many meanings, right? It is the last of our humanity. And if you take everything away from us, then who are we? It is, these questions all the way through are asked all the time. And it's brilliantly done. And to people, to overlook that and just think, I want to shoot zombies. Well, you're kind of missing the point of the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, like let's dive straight into it. So I think kind of to jump on the back of what you were saying, Joey, as well, like this episode, we've had exposition in the last two episodes where we've seen, prior to the infection, like breaking out, prior to, everything happening, we've seen kind of like a more of a cold opening leading towards that. Episode 1, we had the scientist talking on stage. Episode 2, we followed, the professor in mycology. And then this episode, we're kind of straight back in with Joel. Now, what I like about this is that we do get flashback in this episode, but it uses the present like situation to reference what's happened in the past. So it's kind of flipped itself around, which I think is quite a nice little thing to do. Yeah. So we start where we're with Joel and Ellie. And I really like this quiet kind of just this opening, this setting where they're in the forest, the river's flowing. Joel, you can see like his bloodied hand is in the water. And like, this is just such a moment of peace and just reflection for them both after obviously the big loss of Tess in the last episode. And, the little just beautiful subtleties here of like Joel picking out rocks from the river, creating like a rock cairn just on the side. And like they're symbolic for, many things, but particularly here, it's a symbology of loss, almost like that kind of tombstone for somebody. It's that memorial of somebody that he's building there. But also rock cairns, they're used by park rangers as well for hikers to show them they're on the right path. And I think that's so evident here, where,
nice.
That's almost Joel, as if saying I'm on the right path. I'm doing kind of Tess talked me into this. I feel like I'm doing something meaningful. I've got this girl that I'm transporting, and I'm on the right path. And I just thought that was a lovely double meaning there with that, the stacking of the rocks and how beautiful that was. Both symbology of loss of Tess, but also being on that right direction now.
Yeah.
But yeah, what did you think of this opening, Joey?
I definitely appreciated it opening with the intimacy of Joel. I
Mm,
love water imagery in general. It is such a space of renewal. And from a literary metaphoric standpoint, water is often added into storylines for that purpose,
mm,
particularly rain. But in general, we go to rivers, streams to wash ourselves clean. And I think that Joel is not only mourning the loss of Tess, but as this episode unfolds, we experience more as Joel and Ellie come back at the end that Joel is experiencing the loss of this time in his life and the people that he has built connection with. And it really is the beginning of his story with Ellie. And so, as he's isolated in the beginning of the episode and he's building this in memoriam, rock, whatever it might be, um, I think it's also his mourning of himself. And
mm.
I know this was also a controversial part of the episode because it says 10 miles east
Yeah,
of Boston. And this is certainly geographically
yeah.
not the
Don't look like
Northeast.
that.
This is not at all. But I still think that we're creating a fantasy. It's a subtle shift. There actually were a few moments in this episode I'll bring up that not irked me, but felt like they removed themselves from the suspension of disbelief a little bit in small ways. And this was one of them in which it's supposed to be Massachusetts. This is not the geography of Massachusetts.
Right.
And it's a small, it's 10 miles, sorry, outside of Boston,
Mm.
which is still very close to Boston. So yeah, I subtle. I know it was a bit of a controversial moment. I think Steven Spielberg might have posted something about it. But I liked this moment. I thought it was cute, and I thought the dialogue that he had with Ellie following this was
Mm.
also endearing and is says a lot about the story and the relationship that's going to be unfolding.
Absolutely, especially when, they start to engage and like Ellie's the one who's trying to break the ice, kind of break the tension is by trying to talk to Joel. He keeps shutting it down, basically.
Mm.
I love the little subtlety as well of when he's pulling food out of the bag, he pulls Tessa's food out and looks at it for a second and then tosses it to Ellie. Just those little moments there by Pedro Pascal, which are beautifully done. And again, I love that Ellie stands her ground. When she kind of says, look, it's not my fault that Tess died. And she's kind of like, establishing this look, if we're going to move forward, we need to set the record straight here. You guys made a decision to transport me. It's not my fault that she died, and you've got to remember that. And it's really important that she does that to stand up for herself and make that clear because it isn't her fault.
Mm.
It's an unfortunate situation that happened. It's all. I mean, God, we loved Tess, right? We all loved Tess, but she's got a mind. She knows exactly what the situation is, and she's just telling him straight.
Yeah. Tess acted as Joel's compass in many
Mm,
ways. She determined what he did and navigated his emotions to calm him, talk him off of irrational reactionary ledges. And now, without Tess, Joel is left with sitting in that himself. I like that Ellie stepped in here, maybe consciously recognizing that dynamic,
mm,
but regardless, stepping in as a grounding agent, something to put
mm.
Joel's feet on the ground and say, this is what's happening, because he at this point is not used to doing that for himself. I also think Ellie is negotiating within herself the idea that she is to blame because when they are experiencing the clickers, it is Ellie's breath that
Mm,
triggers the clicker to respond. And
mm,
so I imagine she is blaming herself a bit. And so this is also her talking herself off the ledge.
yeah.
And even the follow up line saying, we can manage that 5 hours, we can manage that hike, meaning we can manage
Mm,
each other. But also, I think she's speaking to herself saying, I can manage that. I can manage with pretending for 5 more hours. And so she's momentarily structuring that, okay, I just need to get to this point and then I need to get to this point.
yeah.
I also love that she said you made a choice. I think that is a really important theme within the show. And I've spoken about it a bunch about how there isn't a lot of downtime when making decisions.
Yeah.
And even the decision to take Ellie, that was such a quick decision, that Joel doesn't even have the opportunity in that moment to properly weigh his options, the pros and the cons of the situation. And so that is brought back where decisions are so quick and we are left with, we have to make the best decision. And sometimes it's not the best decision. It's just the decision that was made.
Yeah, it's a great point as well about Ellie still holding some of that, feeling guilt for her death. That's an absolutely great point made there. And again, I think she kind of justifies everything in her mind as well by saying, we've still got to carry on. We've got to move. We can't,
Yeah.
we've had this moment, we've stopped for a second. We've taken time to remember Tess, but we really have to keep going here, which is when, she emphasizes 5 hours, we can do that. And then off they go. And I love this beautiful kind of montage of shots where it's just distance, where you see them going over a bridge, you see them walking kind of like next to the fields. Like it's beautifully shot. It gives that real essence of space around them now, compared to how much kind of, you think about the last episode, how claustrophobic that was in the museum with the clickers and everything like that. And then we've got this beautiful open space now. And I love like, oh, it's stunningly done. And even like, Ellie's starting to talk to Joel again. He's not really having a lot of it, but she is starting to get to know him. She's starting to like, seep through a little bit. She still keeps asking about a gun all the time. He keeps turning her down, which obviously that comes back later on in this episode. But I love as well just the moment of when she says to Joel, like, oh, there's not really a lot out here. And he says, like, yeah, like, we probably won't see infection or anything, like infected or anything like that. And she's like, well, what are you looking for? And he's like, people, and that's such an important point to make, which obviously in this episode later on, but also in future episodes going forward, when we see the likes of, episode 4 and episode 5, how dangerous people can be. And I just love that little foreshadowing of what's to come. I thought that was really, really nicely done.
Yeah.
And then they go to Cumberland Farms. And what happens when they get there, Joey?
Well, I first want to say you're not from the States, but Cumberland Farms, I don't remember if this is in the game. I don't think it is.
Okay.
This is a bit of a Northeast Easter egg. So this is a very common convenience store that we have around the Northeast. And I have a Cumberland Farms probably 15 minutes from where I live.
What?
So they're pretty common. And even the way she says it, Cumberland Farms, it's so I think the writers were kind of laughing at the geography. They're making it very real for viewers the viewership. And, aside from the beginning of the episode being filmed thousands of miles from Boston, but this I thought was a cute Easter egg. And I like how there's a dynamic established that Joel has taken this path before. He's going into this Cumberland Farms because he has a stash hidden there, but he can't find it. He doesn't remember where it is. Again, Tess is his compass. Again, he does not know where Jakarta is. This man is reactionary. He has a high EQ. He understands people. He understands situations. He can make quick decisions. But when it comes to those little details, he kind of misses them sometimes. And Frank has a line later on in this episode where he says, paying attention to the little things or something along those lines. That's how we show love. Yeah. And I think it's interesting that you have Joel, who's just kind of incapable of that. And Joel is such a mirrored image of Bill that it would be funny that Frank says that to Bill, who's the reflection of Joel, who we're saying now can't fully focus on the details of things. Sometimes he's just big picture thinker, but he's looking for the secret stash. He has some things tucked away. Ellie uses this as an opportunity to explore. She ends up finding tampons, but I don't think her intention is to find tampons. I think her intention is to be adventurous, to have personal agency, to be within that sense of isolation within this brand new world she's experiencing for the first time. And we see this moment in the basement in which she comes across an infected. And I will say, I thought this was beautifully poetic, kind of creepy. This infected also looked a little airbrushed, so he was giving. However, I thought it was really nice. I thought focusing on one of these creatures close up, still, where it's not scary, it's not a threat, allows the viewer to have a little bit of more observational skills. We can look and we can stare and we can really reflect on that this is formerly a human. This was a person because they resemble that, but obviously they're inhabited. But I think the moment here that's really great is this repetition within Ellie's character development up until now. In the end of episode 1, she leans in when Joel kills the guard. In episode 2,
Mm.
she's saying, how many have you killed? Can I use a gun? She's again asking for a gun, and now she's here and she has this moment where she can practice her skill set that she wants
Yes.
to practice. And I'm not entirely sure what they're establishing. I will say, from someone who's played the games, Ellie is a dangerous person.
Mm.
And we like her, but she's dangerous and she's capable of some scary shit.
Yeah.
And I think they're building that up right now for the future seasons.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also this kind of witty quality where she's seeing an opportunity to experience it so that when it comes time that she needs to do it in a real life situation, she can pull the trigger on it. And I thought it was a really nice isolated moment in which we get to see Ellie alone for the first
Mm.
time in this world and see what is going on behind her mind. Again, what is subterranean, what is beneath, and that is what we're experiencing right now with Ellie.
Absolutely. And I think it does a lot of foreshadowing this little moment. Like, you and I, Joey, played the game. We know that later on there will be a significant amount of time when Ellie is by herself. And it's a nice little moment of foreshadowing that as well. But for me, a few little things in this. I love the fact that, she found the tampons, which is something that Joel, being, a guy, probably wouldn't think about for Ellie. So, she packs them away straight away. But then, even just a little detail of her like getting the rubbish bin and just setting that up so she's got herself a way to climb out. She's a smart girl. She's learning stuff as she goes along, which is really just a lovely little detail there. But for me as well, this was in a sense of power where, this creature's trapped under the rubble, cannot hurt, cannot harm her at all. She has the weapon to kill. And, all the time she's been told you've got to run away from these creatures. You see something like this, you've got to run. She's been scared, but for the first time here, the first thing she does is gets closer, as you said, flicks that knife out, cuts the skin just to have a look herself, examines this, and then just stabs it straight away and kills it. Ellie's had the power here, and that's not a lot of what she's kind of, had to deal with that we've seen on the TV show up until this point. So I thought it was a nice little moment of power dynamics there as well, but also it's also a nice little foreshadowing of when we look at the most recent episode, which is episode 5, where, Ellie at this point, she's taken the knife and she's stabbed that infected. And that's kind of the realization of, right, this is how I kill them. And you think to episode 5, 2 episodes time, when Henry and Sam are trapped under the car, and we get, Ellie's heroic moment when she runs over and stabs the 2 infected in the neck with her knife to save them. And I love this. It's this foreshadowing. We kind of flash back to moments like this, which mean so much and make a lot of those moments, which I just think is brilliantly done.
I think that in real life, people struggle with the idea that a human could be two things simultaneously, or that something can be two things simultaneously.
Yeah.
And I think literature and this particular storyline, as explored in the game and in the show so far, explores the duality of nature and how we can be good and not so good sometimes. And so Ellie, even though there is this moment in which she is saving someone in the future by this exact same skill set, I agree with you. I think this is a power move. This is ego based. This is not, and this is her overcoming some sense of fear, but this is not to free this infected. This is not to save the person inside. It is exclusively for Ellie. And that in and of itself isn't really a great quality. And it might be a necessary quality, but it doesn't feel like a positive human quality to just want to kill something for the sake of killing it.
Right. Absolutely. But again, the dynamic that she has with Joel and obviously she had with Tess, she's like, she's listening to them. She's been told what to do the whole time, right? And then this is the moment when she's by herself that she has the power in this situation. And what she chooses to do with that is really interesting as a character trait and a character study of Ellie. And I think that's a really good point, Joey, actually. So yeah, as we say, she kind of climbs back out. Joel, hasn't got much ammo left in his machine gun, so he kind of buries that, and then they carry on the road. Now, I love that, they're kind of walking along and they come to the airplane crash. And that for me is just beautiful. Like the way that they're looking on it, the way that they look at it differently as well. Joel kind of looks and Ellie's kind of really excited thinking about oh my God, that airplane. And Joel's like, oh, you had to pay so much for a middle seat for crap food, whatever. And then Ellie even says, dude, you got to go up in the sky. we remember that she's a product of this new world. There's a lot
Mm.
that she hasn't experienced. And like, I just loved like Joel's just quietness about that. And he kind of looks and just reflects like, "Well, actually, yeah, she hasn't got to experience that. But just these little moments of when you see that destruction, it kind of elevates where it shows how far mankind's come, right? The heights of mankind when like we could fly in the sky with planes. And then this kind of completely juxtaposes the next scene, kind of with the mass grave. And it just shows the depths of humanity, how low they're willing to go. So I love the doubleness in that. It's just beautifully, beautifully played. The conversation that they have here, which episode one, this is the moment I was talking about, ding, 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 remember, is that they talk about the infection, the cordyceps, and how it actually kind of mutated right into the food supply, into corn, into the wheat, and everything like that. And there's a moment when Joel's kind of talking about things where he says, it was in bread, it was in cereal. He pauses for a second and then says
Mm.
pancake mix.
Yes.
And that's such a nice little throwback to episode one when, Sarah opened the cupboard. She's like, oh, I was going to make you, pancakes for your breakfast, but we've got no pancake mix. And just that realization on Joel's face when it's like, wow, that could have been me. It's
Mhm.
just that was beautifully played, right?
Yeah. And also that post-traumatic response in
Yes.
which so many subtleties of the world remind him of losing Sarah and
Mm.
remind him of his life prior. And I also looked up because I was like, there has to be significance. Jakarta has the largest flour mill in the world.
There you go.
So that's why that's why this was the origin story explored in episode 2. So
Nice one,
that
Joey.
provides more information because I was like, there has to be significance to Jakarta. They didn't just
Right.
randomly choose this
Yeah.
place. I enjoyed this. I thought this was nice. And in the same way that this episode moves into Bill and Frank, and this episode, not so similarly to episodes 1 and 2, jumps right into the action with Joel and Ellie. I also find the format still similar because in the beginning half of episode 1, it's exploration of world building. In the beginning of episode 2, exploration of world building. They're both these kind of detailed expositions. And we're still in that in the beginning half of this episode. There is still an
Mm.
exposition happening that is leading up to explaining why the world is the way that it is. And this is the moment of that.
Mm. Yeah, it was beautifully done. And then, as they're walking on, they come to obviously, the mass grave, as it
Mm.
were. And, Ellie's like, Joel's like really hesitant that Ellie goes to see it, but she rushes ahead and finds it. And then this conversation is obviously really important when Ellie's kind of questioning Joel, saying, like, why would they, like, how did this happen? Why did they do it? And it's kind of him explaining this is what Fedra do. And she's like, yeah, but why? And he's like, well, dead people can't be infected.
Mm.
And that's such the underlining kind of message of how far Fedra and this new government are willing to go to try and contain this. And we see that where we see like the bombing in the cities in the earlier kind of episode and things like that. And it just really undercuts that when you go into this flashback, when the camera zooms in on like the kind of blanket around a baby and like the dress, then you actually see the woman holding the baby,
Mm.
wearing the dress, wrapped in that blanket. And it's just that horrifying flashback. And it's what we were talking about before, where the other episodes, we've had a little bit of introduction from the past and it's brought us to the present. We're in the present right now, and this seeing this grave takes us to the past and explains the past. And I really like that difference in
Yeah.
dynamic. It was beautifully shot. And again, like we're in this little town. It's like Lincoln, right? Where Bill lives. We've got like Fedra agents like evacuating the little town, and it's horrible in the fact that you see these people are just going to be led to die. They've even like given the soldiers, they're carefully packing the suitcases onto the truck as well. And this is to avoid like mass panic. This is just to calmly evacuate people. They don't know they're going off to their death. And it's just to keep everything kind of nice and kind of in routine, just get them off there. There's no mass panic or anything like
Mm.
that. And yeah, it's just horrifying at the depths of what Fedra are willing to do here, right?
Yeah. A few things about this scene. And I think that this is a subtle moment where it ties in a lot of backstory in a really subtle way. In the opening of the show, so the beginning of episode 1, there is subtle commentary that would relate to the contemporary world, specifically global warming.
Mm.
And we see more commentary made here. So Ellie talks about being in school, and she says, um, they didn't teach us how their shitty government failed to prevent a pandemic, which felt very
Mm.
pertinent to the now.
True that.
Um, Also, this establishes that Fedra is an extension of the US government. This isn't a brand new government made. She says how their shitty government failed to prevent a pandemic. So Fedra is the US government evolved, which I
Mm.
thought was interesting. Um, we also have a few other moments in this episode that talk about the same thing. When we meet Bill, he says, New World Order jackboot fucks. Again, commentary of the now. And
Yeah.
another thing that this scene reminded me of that was another allusion to this in the episode was when Bill and Frank are arguing over how the government used to be Nazis.
Yeah.
This scene in which people are being shipped to their death felt very reminiscent of films and stories and documentaries that I've seen about the Holocaust. So I think
Yeah.
choosing the word Nazi was an interesting choice to kind of describe the way in which the government disposed of average innocent people.
Hmm.
Um, this is another area that I was a little irked about, and it's minor, but
Okay.
this 20-year-old grave was not massively overgrown, and that
Mm.
just didn't make any sense to me. And that was another world building moment. You know, we go to the beginning where it's not in Boston, we go to this, and I'm like, this just wouldn't happen. It wouldn't look this way.
Right.
And it's minor, but those little details to me matter when it comes to this stuff, because as Frank says, the little details are what matters, how we show love. And, you know, that's a very homosexual thing to say. And I agree with Frank.
Absolutely. We homosexuals agree with Frank in that point.
Yes.
Yeah, so then we see like, the spraying of the red X on the wall means that,
Mhm.
there's not nobody here. Like, sorry, at the door, this place is clear. And then, we get the introduction to Nick Offerman's Bill, who, by
Mhm.
the way, is just, I mean, a force to be reckoned with in this role. I think he's perfectly cast. And do you know, like it was actually, I was watching an interview with Nick Offerman and like he originally was going to turn the role down. He was too
Mm.
busy. He was too busy to do things. And then his real life wife, Megan Mullally, which is obviously, Karen from Will and Grace, she actually read the script and she was like, you need to stop everything you're doing, pal. You need to go to this reading because this shit is real. And then he was like, okay, okay. And then he's like, actually, yeah, you're right. So he's like, you've got my wife to thank for this. I thought that was an incredible little
Leave
anecdote.
it up to the Will and Grace, the, the the one who's been indoctrinated by the gays to be like,
Absolutely.
this is going to be big.
Listen to me, I know the gays.
Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously we've got like Bill, as you said, Joe, he's like down underneath, he's in his bunker, he's like below his basement. So this is like a
Mm.
bunker below that. I loved like the moment when he's looking up and he can hear like the federal soldiers walking around. They're saying, like, oh, look, it's clear. I'm in the basement, there's nobody here. He's watching everything from surveillance. He's got all these cameras and everything set up where he's watching. Really interesting point when we come back to that later on and how Bill sees the world. And how like segregated he makes himself feel. This whole the way that this section's shot, where there's shadow on his face, we don't see his face until he steps outside into the light. And I think that's such a, that's an obvious choice in the way that they filmed that. They're concealing his identity from us until we see him. And that's what Bill does. He conceals his identity until he meets Frank. And I just thought that was a real interesting way that this whole scene was shot. It was beautifully done.
Mm.
Yeah. And then obviously we see, all the supplies that he's got. He's loads of guns. He's got all of this stock, all of this ammunition, everything like that. And again, this nice little nod to the video game when obviously Fedra, everybody's gone, and he does step outside, he has a gas mask on. We spoke about this earlier on, right? Where in the game, gas masks, it's all about spores. That's why they wear them, so they don't breathe them in. But they did away with that in the TV show. But I love it's kind of like a little nod to that, but also just a little bit of paranoia from Bill, the sense that he doesn't know what's happening out here. I'm just going to pop this gas mask on. But yeah, what do we think of Bill Offerman just as Bill? Bill
Uh,
Offerman. What do we think of Nick Offerman as
as
Bill?
Bill. Well, I mean, I think that as soon as I heard he was playing this role, the first instinct I had was, oh wow, there really isn't a more perfect human
Mm-hmm.
to play Bill in character. I love the gas mask because that's how we meet Bill in the game. We
Right.
see him that same way, so this creates such a parallel to how we are used to Bill.
Mm-hmm.
I thought Nick Offerman did an amazing job. I know him so well from Parks and Rec,
Right.
and he obviously is a very comedic person. But, comedians are able to excavate the world from their very deep understanding of it.
Mm.
So, although I didn't expect the extent of this deep well of a human he portrayed, he probably helped create, it makes complete sense to me, despite my disbelief while watching. I was so taken aback by
Mm,
his ability to captivate and capture. I
right.
thought he was outstanding. What a once in a lifetime role and opportunity. And I know when we talk about marginalized communities and representation in acting in Hollywood, there is often some rub, there's some friction with heterosexual men playing homosexual characters. And I want to speak my opinion on that briefly, in
Mm,
that I think that the character of Bill and minimizing him to his sexuality limits the capacity of his character.
right.
And I also think that with casting Frank, who is a real life homosexual, it kind of allows for this dynamic to be a more three-dimensional story because Frank is there present,
Mm,
adding to this character as well and speaking to the subtleties that maybe Bill hasn't personally experienced in his life. And I believe Craig Mazin spoke about how a lot of the people involved in the project as well are specifically middle-aged married gay men.
mm,
And he spoke about the importance of this. I think it was Craig Mazin. I was listening to him speak, so I didn't see who was speaking, but he was saying how that the middle-aged quality of this character is equally as important because it is about love at that stage in your life. And so
mm,
again, I think minimizing Bill to simply his sexuality and having opinions about the casting, which I haven't heard too much about, but I do know typically queer people become a little frustrated when we are not offered the same opportunities as heterosexual people, and when there is a potential opportunity, it's given to someone who's heterosexual. I still think Bill was such a great portrayal, and I also think it's a really great way to bring in an audience and challenge the way that they perceive something. I thought it was kind of such a serve that, like, Nick Offerman's this like burly man who
yeah.
people know to be, he's gonna eat beef jerky and he's gonna shoot whiskey and he's gonna chop wood, and Bill does all that.
Right.
But as soon as we go through this moment where he's collecting the supplies and he collects Camus, which is a very expensive, nice wine, I was like, that's the first hint.
Hello.
Um, uh, he then has this very demure, poised, delicate meal where he just
Mm,
eats. And I love the duality. I like how they
mm,
juxtaposed this, building him up to be this burly man, and then they completely challenged everyone's preconceived notion about what this type of person can be. And
yes.
using Nick Offerman as a gateway to expose that and to challenge people who know Nick Offerman as that, I thought was a
Yeah.
really smart casting choice, aside from the
Agreed.
fact that he's just did an amazing job.
Oh my God. I mean, just in looks alone, like he just looks like
Yeah.
Bill. Like it's scary. But I mean, just to kind of piggyback on what you said there as well, Joey, which I think is really important. It's that, yes, he is a heterosexual, man playing a gay role. But as you said, the people involved around this, were really important in the sensitivity and the authenticity of the story and of the characters. But the director of the episode, Peter Hoare, is a gay man, so he kind of felt, he even talks about it, saying feels that deep connection in telling this story and being representative, with his own sexuality in that as well. You've got like obviously Maria Bartlett as well, as you said, a homosexual actor there playing Frank, and there's a lot of people involved in the set there as well. And obviously Neil Druckmann as well has always pushed for representation within both video games,
Mm-hmm.
and I just think the people that are working around this are really delivering that authenticity. It's not a story which is written by, a room full of heterosexual people who have no idea what it's like to live this type of lifestyle. So I love that, you reference that, and that he plays that role so beautifully, so respectfully. And the relationship that they are able to portray in this episode is just stunning for anybody to watch. I just think it's so well handled and such a beautiful performance by Nick Offerman. It really, really is. And yeah, as you said, like, we go on, we see him like setting up everything. He's going around the town, he's collecting all supplies. Like when the power goes out, so he creates a backup generator and just all these little details that are just really, really lovely. Again, the classy choice of the wine because hello, like homosexual, which I love that this comes back in later on. Brilliant, brilliantly played. And then we kind of jump forward 4 years. So he's been living kind of by himself for 4 years. I do like, though, the little moment, sorry, when he's eating his food and he looks on the screen and he sees, like, one of the infected and he's like, oh, and like just sees it walk towards the trap and then gets its obviously head blown off by the gun that he's set up there. And he's just like, all right, yep. And then
Yeah.
just carries on eating as well.
And that tripwire is something that is commonly explored in the game. When you are
Right.
playing as one of the characters, but specifically Ellie has a huge part in The Last of Us 2, in which
Yes.
she has to avoid an entire zone that is contaminated with tripwires. So I think it was
Yes.
it was nice that they included that.
But yeah, and then, we go forward 4 years. He gets another notification basically that somebody is in the dugout that he's got outside, in that pit that he's got outside. And he goes out, and it is our meet cute of the episode where Bill and Frank meet for the first time at gunpoint. But yeah, just, I love this, just, the dynamics of like, Frank's down in this pit, like Bill's obviously up the top pointing a gun down at him. And like the way that we look at this moment where, we've got a man that we pointing a gun down at another man and saying, look, you can get out, but you can't stay here. Frank says, I'm trying to get to Baltimore. He even has like Bill has a Fedra scanner, which it checks his neck as well. He's like, where did you get that? And he just doesn't answer him and like helps him out. And just how I love that all of this, just to go in a little bit of the metaphor of the whole episode. But, we talk here about Bill has barriers, right? He has literal personal barriers, but he also has physical barriers that are all around the place. You see him putting up fences, you see him with pits like this. He's trying to keep people and anything out of his space. Yet when Frank comes in and as that relationship develops, his own barriers start to go down. I just think it's beautifully poetic the way that kind of goes through the whole episode. And it's
Yeah.
just moments like this when you first see that moment when they're having the conversation and he says to him, like, they have like that little back and forwards about like, this isn't an Arby's. If you go and tell everybody, then everyone will expect a free meal. And he's like, this isn't an Arby's. And he's like, well, it's a restaurant. It wouldn't serve free meals. And then this is the first moment of him kind of taking someone in and like starting to look after somebody. Here's a meal, here's a shower, come on in. And I just love these moments with Bill where it just starts to break down his character, not in the sense of like, turning him into somebody else, but just breaking down those barriers, right?
Yeah. One of my favorite lines in the entire show, which this conversation reminds me of, I'm not show, but this particular episode is when they're eating the strawberries and Bill says, I wasn't afraid until I met you, or I wasn't afraid until you came along. How beautiful, how moving, just like one sentence. But it speaks to this idea that Bill was so shut off that he detached himself from being human. He detached himself from his emotions. He had detached himself from what is left, what is the last of us. We need to rediscover these parts of ourselves when nothing else stands, which is the point of the show, which is why he is such a parallel to Joel, because Joel's going through that same transformation.
Yeah.
I also, I don't know if it's just me, but I thought it was really funny that Frank's inside Bill's hole. I just think it's it's like this sticks
It's
a
a little
ladder
bit of
in there.
foreshadowing.
Yeah, there it is. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Pulls
Okay.
him
I
out.
liked
What?
it. Oh, also Frank's right before they switch scenes to go inside the house, the way Frank looks at Bill is
Yes.
so nice. It's so endearing. What great acting. But also Frank knows. He knows. He
Of
done
course
know.
he
He done
knows.
known.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
didn't
The
have to
gaydar
he
is
didn't have to
going off.
figure it out. Yeah, he knew.
My internal gaydar is flying right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this. Like, again, he invites him in and like all the little subtleties of when like Frank's looking around, he's just like, oh my God. Because obviously, on one side, he hasn't seen like a property like this in years, like actual years, and then on the other hand, he is kind of starting to like suss out who Bill is. And I really kind of love that. The moments of like when he stands up and he like gets the dust off, like, the mantelpiece is looking at the photographs, and then Bill comes in with the meals and like just looks at him as to say, what are you doing? And like, when he places, and this is such an important detail, when he places the food down in front of Frank and he like turns the plate around for him, and we see him do that again later on. And then I love like Frank's face when like he just looks down at the food and he has like the biggest smile as if to say, I haven't seen food like this in fucking forever. This is everything. And just even that like moment of when he like takes out the wine, starts to pour it for Frank, and he's like, a man who knows to pair rabbit with a Beaujolais. And then I love that Bill's like, oh, I know I don't seem the type. And he's like, yeah, you do. And just
Yes.
beautiful.
Fred to filth. I do want to note some things here. Uh,
Yes.
well, firstly, I want to talk about the dust quickly because
Mhm.
the dust comes back for me in imagery because dust go it brings me back to the first episode when we see inside of Joel's apartment, if you will, for the first time, and they cut to the
Mm.
window and dust is floating. And I just like the idea of like when the dust settles. I think it's a really nice imagery and probably a metaphor. And it's also just how contaminated this world is with
Right.
stillness. But also, I really think this show does an amazing job in each episode with bringing each episode full circle, in which in the beginning episode, for instance, I brought this up a few times, but at the end, when Joel and them are going to the soldier, they go underneath a school bus. They're almost
Mm.
returning back in time. The shots start to emulate and mirror what was in the beginning half of the episode. And we see the same thing that happens in the second episode. There are mirrors from the first half to the second half. With this, one of the things I remember most when Joel and Ellie enter this house is it's covered in dust.
Yes.
And I also thought that it was maybe intentionally put there on the sill to grab your attention because it's not within Bill's character description to leave dust anywhere, which
Yeah.
is maybe why he's like, "What are you doing?" Like, "Uh-oh, I didn't clean that." But it didn't feel like something Bill would do. Bill
Mm.
pays attention to those kind of, and maybe he doesn't fully pay attention to details, and maybe that's the point, and maybe that's why Frank says what he says. But I feel like Bill takes care of things. He's been
Yeah.
taking care of things up until this point, and so I thought it would be negligent for him to forget that. So I thought the intention might have been to connect us back to that moment, to bring us
Mm.
back full circle at the end of the episode when Joel and Ellie experience this space for the first time, the same way that Frank is now experiencing that space for the first time. I also want to note that I worked in a fine dining restaurant for a really long time, and positioning the meat to the person who's eating is fine dining etiquettes. The way that he served the food, fine dining etiquette. The way that he poured the wine, fine dining etiquette. This is a very like to the book correct way to serve. So it was just subtle details, but that's how we show love. The subtle details that were put in the
Yes.
episode I thought were so nice,
Right.
which is
Love
why I
that.
was a little upset about the few details that were missed because
Mm.
this show pays attention to details and I enjoy that it pays attention to details.
Right. Nice. And of course, Bill would know, turning of the plate like that. And Frank knows because in his mind, he's like, because you're a gay.
Oh
Love
yeah, he's
that.
like, well, been here, done that. I know
Yep.
this.
I know what's going on here. I know this flirting that's going on. You
Oh,
turn
and
that
then
plate.
Bill's hair flip
Yep.
when they're eating. He just
Flips the little hair. Yep. It's just all these little moments are just brilliant to watch. I love
yeah.
it. It's just so well played. And then, like this piano scene. So, like, Frank obviously, he's like saying, well, it's probably time for me to go, but I've been staring at this the whole time. He's like, oh my God, you know how much one of these is worth? And I love that Bill's like, well, probably not much now. Just that little line. But then, he's like kind of going through the music. He's like, no, this is you. This is you. And pulls out, the music, the sheet music, the song Long, Long Time by Linda Ronstadt. Now, I mean, for starters, you go back to the radio codes. This is a 70s song. This is new stock coming in. Frank is new stock who's come into Bill's life. I just thought I love the little message there with that. That was beautifully done.
Such a great observation.
Yeah. But as well, like, when Frank sits down and starts to like basically in Bill's eyes murder this song. Like he's like performing it like, he's in a bar and he's surrounded by all his friends. They're all having a good sing along and all having a good time. And it's Bill who's like, he's like, no, 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 stop, stop, stop. You can't play it like that. And then Frank's like, well, why don't you play it? Why don't you sit down? And this is Frank asking Bill, why don't you show me who you are? Drop everything. Like the barriers are coming down. We've had a nice dinner. We've started to talk to each other. Show me who you are through your performance of this song. And when Bill sits down and just, it's beautiful. It's delicacy. Just the moment like he takes a breath and then just gently places his hands on the keys. And he hasn't done this in such a long, long time. and just the emotion and everything he plays in that. I mean, the lyrics itself speak for itself, but the way Frank like just stands and kind of looks down at him and just watches him play and just he can't take his eyes off this moment. He's just in this moment with Bill, and it's just beautiful, right?
It's so good, not just within the context of the episode and Frank's meticulous way of breaking Bill down to kind of get what he wants, which is a
Mm,
safe space and human connection.
right.
Kind of saying, I know I have something to offer you, and you clearly have something to offer me.
Hmm.
And it, in the beginning, starts that way, but obviously turns into a very long, long love story. But I thought this was more important for the viewer who plays the game because of the relationship that the game has with music. This reminded me in terms of intensity, intimacy, and delicacy, the way that Ellie performs Aha's Take on Me in
Yes.
the music store in The Last of Us 2, and
Hmm.
how in The Last of Us 2, an acoustic guitar, which we learn Joel teaches Ellie,
Hmm.
which is such a connective tissue for the two of them and their storyline. But Ellie returns to this acoustic guitar throughout the entire second game as a kind of cornerstone vantage point. Music is so integral. And obviously, we've explored that in certain ways with the radio codes and the smart choices of songs that have been used so far.
Right.
However, this directly takes us into the game once more because it's not the exact same scene, but it communicates the same thing that Ellie's cover of Take on Me
Mm.
does. And I still listen to that cover to
Oh,
this day because it's so amazing. And the outro duet that they had, Joel and
mm.
Ellie in The Last of Us 2, I don't remember the song, but I think it might have been a Johnny Cash song. Ugh. Anyway, sorry, I had to say because musician,
No.
singer.
Hello. No, it's beautiful. It is beautiful. And you're right. Like I was telling, my partner about that as well. I was literally this morning telling him, I was like, it's funny because Ellie in the second game, and he had no idea. And I still need to play him that version actually, because it's like that scene. And I love that in that video game, just to talk about it briefly. When you go into that part of the game, when you go into that store, you don't go in there to play that song to Dina, which is, Ellie's girlfriend. You go in there just to get something to then move on. It's optional, right? And then you see that guitar, you have to go over to it. And when she sits down and plays it, I literally put my controller down and just watched it because it was just stunning. And it's the
It's yeah,
same.
it's one of the most stunning moments in a video game I've ever experienced, and it's something that you can pass. You don't necessarily,
Yeah,
you might not see it.
yeah, that's it. And again, like this was almost this moment where Frank, Bill could have rightfully said, you've had your meal, you've had your drink, get out. But it's Frank who kind of says, oh, look, there's the piano. And then Bill's like, okay, let's kind of explore this. This didn't have to happen. But because it did, this is like the establishment of their relationship. And it's just beautiful. Like, when Frank after says, so who's the girl? And then he says, oh, there is no girl. And he's like, I know. And then when he leans in to kiss him, and then this kiss is so intimate. It's beautiful. I love that. You look at Frank, he's got like tears coming down his cheeks as well, because this is something he probably thought he would never, ever have again. And it's just the acting between the pair of them here is absolutely beautiful. Like, Nick Offerman just looking at him, in pure shock. And they both never thought that they'd be able to have this. It's just stunning. It's absolutely stunning. Like, I love that moment. And then straight away, Frank, says to him, like, go have a shower, Bill, because shit's gonna get real.
I thought it was so well done. It had that nice friction of uncomfortable and awkward,
Mm,
like a
yeah,
first kiss would be, which this is more or less a first kiss for Bill.
right.
And the the way Frank not only captures this longing, this thirst that's been quenched, but how Bill is so guarded and how simply one performance broke that all down. And
Mm,
Frank was able to see so deeply inside of his soul
yeah,
that I think that's what moved him to tears. It was the human within the shell, the human within the person who's guarded, the home within the gates, if you
right.
will. and again goes back to this repetitive theme of this episode of what lies beneath, what
Yeah.
is deep, deep, deep down, what is subterranean that we are keeping hidden, that is subsequently what the show, the whole episode and the show at large are about. And what people are criticizing the episode for doing, they're saying it's about a zombie show and it's not about this. But in reality, the whole point of this human driven game series storyline is about what is left when the
Yeah.
world is not left.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that this is what we're exploring. And I thought this episode was just so brilliant for that reason.
Yeah. And again, like, they've suffered a massive of like a pandemic, right? And like, this is so relatable to us where we've very kind of recently just, have still kind of come out of the masses of the thickness of the pandemic, so to speak. It still hasn't gone away, but and how these two people have found each other during a pandemic. And I just think the story of that is beautiful. How, it's pulled so many people apart, and yet these two people would never have met had this not happened. And just, to talk personally for a second, and to relate this to you and I, Joey, I started doing stuff as well, during the pandemic, online content. You and I might not have ever met had I not started doing that, and like we lived at different parts of the world. I lived in England, you obviously live in America. And it's just so forthcoming. It's just so referential to things like that, where I wouldn't be in the relationship I'm in now because of things that I started to do, like content I started to do during the pandemic and meeting people. And I just think it was such an interesting, for me, a way to put myself into that position and into that kind of framing of this episode. And I just thought that was really prevalent, and just it made me kind of I kind of overlooked that the first time I watched the episode, but then to come back and like I kind of retrospectively thought about it and thought, oh my God, like what Joey and I are doing right now, like we kind of met in similar ways, which is weird, right?
Yeah. What can be discovered or uncovered when the
Mm,
world falls apart?
absolutely. Yeah.
And what is left is genuine human connection. And I think that's why we became friends,
Yeah.
and that's why you met your partner, because so much had been stripped from us that we were left with these innate parts of ourselves. And so we used those innate parts of ourselves. We connected with other people who have those innate parts visible or present. And that is, again, a lot of what this episode and this show are exploring. It's that humanity deep within. And when the world falls apart, what do we have left? And we recently experienced that. It's a really great observation and a really great point. And obviously, you having met your partner within the pandemic, I mean, this episode is nearly correlative. Hopefully, it doesn't have the same ending, unless that's your kind of thing,
Put the wine down. Yes, and then obviously they go up to bed. And then, like Frank kind of asks Bill, like, have you done this before? And I love like the line as well. He's like, I'm not a whore. I'm not like just doing sex for lunches. He says, like, I'm willing to stay for a few more days, and like the intimacy between them here, where like literally like Frank is on top of Bill and like talking directly to him, saying, like, I'm going to stay for a few more days if that's okay. And like, again, we've talked about the barriers of everything with Bill coming down. He's really opened himself here, like completely exposing himself literally, but also metaphorically to this man that he's met
Mm-hmm.
now. And it was a beautiful moment. And again, as you said earlier, Joel, Frank's going to go in Bill's hole.
Yeah, that's what's gonna happen.
That's what
My
happens.
favorite part of this scene was a subtlety I picked up watching it a second time through. But Bill is gently, awkwardly, but gently rubbing Frank's back when they're
Yeah.
in bed together. And I
Yeah.
thought that was really interesting, because if I think back, I would imagine Bill would almost be completely stiff,
Yeah.
but he's actually showing intimacy,
Hmm.
which I thought was telling of where Bill is at this point in his journey, years
Right.
after being completely alone, but also being closeted for his entire life. He was ready to jump into it on an intimate level, on a connection level. It wasn't just about sex. It was about
Yeah.
connection and intimacy.
Absolutely. And then we kind of skip forward here where we go another 3 years into the future. And, straight away, it's like full out balls to the wall. They're arguing with each other. Now, this episode does this quite a lot where we get moments of intimacy, like delicate moments. And then it's kind of it's jarring the juxtaposition where we jump to another moment of where it's a completely different mood altogether. And this is like anger, they're angry at each other and like they're arguing. And this episode kind of like signal posts them as they go, like when they happen throughout, but we jump between moods all the time. And that's kind of very, that references relationships of how we go through these different moments when we're in relationships and how when we get to know each other better and everything like that, we experience different times. And, Frank later on in the episode even says, I've had some really shitty times. I've had some bad days with you, but also, some of the days I've had with you have been some of the best. And it kind of just sets up that as well. It's just beautifully played off. Frank wants to make a life, right? He wants to go and do things within the town. He doesn't want to be so enclosed in the way that Bill's been living in his life. He wants to go and make up the shops, and he wants to do, what is it? He wants to go to like there's the clothing shop. He wants to do that up, and like he's talking and like he says, I want to have friends, and like Bill's like, absolutely not. And I just love that he's slowly starting to work with Bill here and slowly starting to get those barriers down. He even says, I've been in contact with the lovely woman on the radio as well, making friends, and Bill's just really hesitant, really standoffish about this. And as you said, Bill is very, very similar to Joel in very many ways. And again, it's like Frank's kind of saying to him, look, we need to get out of this protective shell. We need to start living our lives, living a life, not just living in this bunker, right?
There was so much here I liked. Most importantly, this roots Bill and Frank into the game and their character dynamic into the game. And that in the game, even though it is a small relationship, we don't get to see this relationship unfold the same way we're seeing in the show. There is this friction of Frank wanting to experience the outside world and Bill wanting to stay small, to stay protected, to stay secure.
Yeah.
And in this as well, we're also seeing parallels to Tess and Joel, in which even when Tess and Joel show up and they eat together, you see that Frank and Tess are mirroring each other, and Joel and Bill are mirroring each other. And so the Frank and Bill dynamic, though different from Joel and Tess, it allows us to see the backstory in some regard of Tess and Joel, because we can imagine this is probably how Tess and Joel might behave a little bit. Frank would be different than Tess, but Joel would be very similar to Bill in his reactions. And I like that it rooted us in that in the game. And this is what I meant in the beginning in saying, I don't think the deviations are that dramatic. I don't think they're that wildly different. It's just different in that it's exploring more of the storyline than what we get in the game.
But you are right, though, in that, in the video game, when you find the letter that Frank left for Bill, he actually mentions this as well, saying how he wanted to go out and explore more, the outside world, and Bill didn't want that. And he even says, like, fuck you, Bill, like in the actual letter itself. And it's a nice little point towards that as gamers as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then I like that we get this kind of lone meal where, Joel, Tess, Bill, and Frank are out, like, sitting there, like Bill's got a gun on him as well. And like, Frank straight away is like, oh, he's just been paranoid. Is that really necessary? He says to him at one point, as they're enjoying this kind of time with them. And you're right, like, Frank and Tess are very similar. I love like that Frank as a gay man is standing Tess because hello, we do too. It's the only right thing to do. But like how beautiful Tess looks as well. Like before she's like, oh, stunning.
I literally wrote how good she looks.
Stunning. This is like kind of before you're seeing this softer side to Tess. We've seen hardened Tess. We've seen literally like beaten up and bloodied Tess. And I just love the innocence, the beauty, the way her hair's blowing in the wind, like just all of that. Oh, beautiful. I mean, Anna Torv is beautiful anyway. But yeah, this conversation is fantastic for the mirroring, as you said, like Bill and Joel are very similar. Even Joel even says like to Bill, like, I respect that about having the gun at the table, but don't point that gun in my face, and then like Frank takes Tess inside, like, oh, come and see something. And like Bill shouting after him and he's not interested, takes Tess away. And the conversation they have here, like they're straight to business, right? Talking about trading, which is what we know that Joel does and Tess does. They talk about trading. Look, we can bring you medication, we can bring you books, we can bring you supplies, and he even says, look, that fence has maybe got a year left on it, if that. Like, I can bring you stuff that can help, it last the rest of your life type thing. They're straight to business. Whereas it's Frank and Tess who are more kind of, let's go and explore this. Let's go and do this. Let's go and just have a look at little things and have a laugh together. Just enjoy our time together. And I really like the polar opposites of each other here.
Yeah. I like how Tess says, whether or not we work together, this was so needed. And then, of course, Frank says, we're working together. I like how they they pulled out the Camus because we see this is the first wine that Bill reaches for. This is the box that he brings home. This is the wine that they have at dinner. And maybe this episode is sponsored by Camus. Who knows? But I think that this is reflective of Frank taking a little bit more control, where because Frank is reaching into the stocks of Bill's good stuff, and Bill's not even available to this conversation, but he is allowing his fanciest wine, his most cherished wine, be used at dinner because obviously
Right.
there's a limited supply. There's a one wine store. They really have to ration the wine, but the
Mm.
choice in choosing this specific wine, it's telling of how much Frank has really moved in to
Yeah.
Bill's life. This dynamic we see at the end with the loss of Bill and Frank and this tough letter that's written to Joel. Obviously, in throughout this episode, we see that Bill cares for Joel
Mm.
because he even though he's saying, I don't, so he's alluding to not liking him, but he even says when he gets shot in this episode, call Joel, he'll take care of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
He not only respects Joel, he cares about Joel. And in the same way that Bill is a mirror to Joel, Joel would behave the same way. So we see Joel in his way caring. There is a frequency of love here that he has
Mm.
for Bill and Frank. And when he walks out of the building after reading that line about Tess, and he says specifically, so they're dead before Ellie even reads the letter,
Mm.
he takes a breath. He has to step outside. And I don't think it's just him living through the moment of I'm it's being made real that I'm losing Tess. He also lost two friends.
Yeah.
And the fact that they have a relationship of dependency brings me back to that quote at breakfast in the first episode, in which Joel says, Tommy doesn't love me, he just depends on me. And
Mm.
Sarah says, I kind of think they're the same thing. And here we're
Yeah.
seeing that explored where there's a dependency. The dependency that exists within a post apocalyptic world is rooted in trust,
Mm.
and trust comes with love. And
Right.
so we're seeing more of that unfold as this show goes on. But I thought that this dynamic was such a nice example of that motif that I anticipated would be part of the show.
Absolutely.
And so, we see this dependency unfolding for the first time at
Mm.
this dinner conversation. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was such a nice moment, a nice unexpected moment in the apocalypse.
Yeah, definitely. Like, as we talked about earlier, like the moments of like stillness that we get in this world when things
Mhm.
kind of can just stop for a second. And like it's like these human kind of interactions that we're so used to having from the old world, when we're able to bring them back in this post-apocalyptic world, means so much. Like we can just go out now, like with friends, sit down, have food together, have drinks together. But this means so much more than that to them, because when that's been stripped away for so long, and then to bring it back, it's just everything to them. And I really, really love that. We also get that Frank and Tess, like they're talking about, if Frank says, look, when we talk on the radio, maybe we should use codes, and that's the introduction of that, when that kind of comes full circle of how that gets introduced. He's like, look, maybe if we did like music of like the 70s, and that conversation starts to die out a little bit, but it's nice that we hear and get an introduction to that. And then Joel warns Bill, he says, look, raiders will come. He's like, they'll come at night. You've got to be armed. You've got to be managed. You've got to be ready. And like he says, we'll be able to handle it. Bill says, we'll manage. And he's like, well, just make sure that you'll be ready. And that obviously pays off later on as well. And then we jump forward again. We're in the year 2013 now. So then Bill and Frank, they're out jogging. And this scene. I mean, this scene for me, just this is everything. This for me just is the episode. Like they're out jogging, and then like Frank says to Bill, look, I want to show you something. And this is what I mean, where we've had like, we've had a scene of them arguing, having a bust up where, there's been tension between like Bill and Joel. There's been tension between like between Bill and Frank, like all of this. And then we get this beautiful, delicate scene where Bill sees the strawberries. He's like, how did you do it? And he's like, Frank says, oh, I sold a gun. And he's like, which gun, straight away? And he's like, well, it's just a small one. I traded a gun. I traded Tess and Joel a gun, so they give us these seeds. And, like you could go into the metaphor of, the gun. It's, it's a death weapon, yet they've been traded seeds. They're growing something now. This is new life that's been made with the strawberries. But as well, like when they come down and then they take the strawberries and they pick them, the camera work here is beautiful. We've got a sun kind of in the distance there that's continuously like shining them. They take the strawberries the way that they clink them like glasses together, and then when they eat them, and it's Bill's laugh in this moment for me that like hits me the most. And then obviously, by the line afterwards when he says, "I was never afraid, before you showed up." And like this for me is just beautiful. As I say, everything around it, the light, the sun that you see on them, how delicate they are, the fact that Bill has that little giggle, which he probably hasn't laughed in actual years, but it's that realization of, oh my God, we've got strawberries and with the man that I love, and he completely breaks down that barrier and tells him how he feels. And it's just stunning, right?
It's great. There's a big emphasis within Bill and Frank's relationship, and particularly Bill's character, in watering plants.
Mm,
And we
yeah.
see when it cuts to the future and Frank is dealing with what presumably is some neurological condition. We see Bill watering a plant that first time he
Mm,
winks at Frank. We see when Joel arrives, the plants have died.
yes.
We see even flowers on the curtains behind in the dining room. I think is the dining room right next to where the gun is kept, but potentially right behind where Frank is positioned. So there's this blossoming, there's this unfolding of life, and
Mm,
this takes me back to the opening scene of episode 2, in which plant life is billowing into these broken structures, the pockmarked museum of life, in which buildings are just decrepit and broken down, but life still finds a way to get in there. And
right.
so Bill is constantly watering these plants as they're growing. And strawberry is something that would take time. Frank waited for the moment for them to be fully grown, sweet, ripe,
Mm,
red, everything. I don't know, aside from strawberries having a remotely romantic, people get people's chocolate covered strawberries. They're looked upon as a romantic Valentine's Day gesture. I don't know if there's anything deeper, but I love the idea of that seeds were planted, that something was in soil and it was watered and it took time, just the
yeah.
way that we're seeing this relationship unfold. I do want to note one more thing before we get out of this space, but I said I was going to bring up a few things that irked me
Okay.
throughout this episode, and I'm just bringing up subtle details. I'm really, I'm fine-toothed combing, but they cut to the fence with cars piled.
How did
How
that
did they get them
happen?
cars?
Yep.
How what did they hire Magneto for the day? How did this happen? Because I ain't buying it.
No.
We didn't get a forklift. We did not. And maybe there's an explanation, and maybe there is a backstory, and maybe the writers and the producers and the directors and the storyline have that, but I don't think it makes sense in the world of Bill and Frank that that would be possible. And those little details kind of bother me.
No, I was the same. Like when I saw the cars piled up next to the fence, I was like, how did they do that? Like, this is a man who has a truck and a speedboat. Like, how did he get those cars up there, please? How did he make that wall and so perfectly placed? Like, him and Frank are not like lifting those cars together and putting them on there. Let's be real. This needs to be addressed. But yeah, I actually did think the same as well. And I did chuckle to myself because I thought, I wonder if Joey picks up on this. And here we are.
Yeah, sorry, it bothered me.
Love it. No, no, no. I love it.
There's one more
Um,
thing. I have one more after this, and when I get to it, I get to it. But that's it. Okay, keep
Let's
going.
do it. Let's read the episode of Filth. Um, yeah, so then we leave this again, kind of what I was saying before. We leave this delicate moment to then have a juxtaposing moment where we
Mm.
have the Raiders show up. And again, this is different where it's lashing down with rain, it's nighttime. We just see the guns and we see feet walking towards. We know what's happening. This is what Joel warned them of. And then I love how all of this plays out when the POV is like, it's kind of on Frank, really, where he's in bed. He wakes up to the sound of something going off outside, explosions. We see like a lot going on here where we see Bill's traps going off. We see like the Raiders being burnt. We see like these spinning saws that's on the bottom as well, the electricity on the fence. And then we hear gunshots. And then, like, obviously, Frank's waking up. He's like looking out the windows. He's panicking, thinking, fuck. And then he goes straight to the dresser. And this is really important for, when Ellie does this later on. Like, kind of opens the drawer, takes out the gun. like checks that it's loaded, puts it back in. We still follow him go down. And I love all of this when, we see Bill in the street and he's got like a sniper rifle kind of, shooting off at the raiders. And then we follow Frank out into the street. And this is beautifully shot again as well. Like just so dark. We see the fire burning. We keep seeing clips of the raiders burning as well. And then straight away, it's like Frank who runs out and says, look, we need to get you inside. Obviously, Bill takes a gunshot wound to the stomach, and it looks like his leg's really injured as well. And straight away, he's like taking him back inside. And at this point, Bill is the protector of the relationship. He's the one that's protecting Frank. But in this moment, Frank assumes that role, grabs Bill, takes him inside, like lays him down on the table, getting the alcohol, rubbing it on his hands, rubbing it on the wound. He's like, Bill thinks in this point, we're being misled here, where we, as the viewer, we think Bill's going to die. This is going to be Frank left by himself. And Bill even thinks that when he's like, look, I've made copies of keys. I've got a list. And like Frank's like, yep, keep telling me about that list, just humoring him while he kind of fixes the wound. And as you said earlier on, Joey, this is the point when, Bill says, call Joel. He'll need to take care of you. At the point of where Frank is literally taking care of Bill. But it is like a nice sense of misdirection here where, you are watching thinking, is this where Bill's going to die? Like, what is happening here? And obviously, things change within the next section. But yeah, what did you think of this moment, Joey?
I liked it. This was the other area of the show that irked me, and I'm gonna actually say that there's two more things that irked me a little bit, but one of them is more believable. I really loved this episode, so it's coming from a place of love that I wish that it was just absolutely perfect. And although I'm gonna give it a great rating at the end of this episode, I also was like looking at it and I'm like, these are small things that may or may not be mistakes. Maybe they were intentional. I'm not too sure, but they just bothered me. And the thing that bothered me most, that I was just like, why is Bill not behind cover when he's shooting his gun?
I know. Yes.
There's no exploration there. If see, this is where writing would make sense if Frank was there, and as soon as Frank comes out, Bill runs and he's like, get away. And at that moment, he's saying, I don't care about myself because I just want to make sure you are safe.
Yeah.
Then it would make sense within his character description, and it would build up that narrative and build up that storyline. But we just have Bill out in the middle of the night by himself, just standing in the middle, shooting at people. I'm sorry, he's a smarter person.
Yeah.
It just doesn't, I don't buy it. I don't buy it. It just doesn't make sense to me. And it irked me because I was like, this just doesn't make sense. And this is such a beautiful episode that's being slightly tainted because of what I am perceiving as negligence. Again, I don't know if the writers and directors, if they had choices behind all this stuff, but it just felt a little lazy at moments.
Right.
I don't know. But ultimately, I thought this was a nice kind of passing of that caring torch for just a moment. Obviously sets up where that gun is placed, which as soon as Ellie walked into that room, I was like, oh yeah, that's this. Yeah. It's happening.
Yeah.
I also want to note that when Joel gets shot, when he's holding Sarah, he gets shot in a very similar place to where Bill got shot.
Interesting
situation. And I see Joel and Bill as such mirrored characters
that
I think they did that on purpose. It's not the exact same spot, but I believe when he's holding Sarah, he gets shot in his left side. And when he's on the ground and Tommy's looking at him, he looks at his left side. And that's where the bullet grazes him more or less, or maybe it goes in, I'm not sure. And then with Bill, it's more around the stomach area, but it's in the same side of his body. So I thought that was interesting. And then the other thing that irks me a little I'm sorry.
I love this. Do it.
It's absolutely believable that someone can save someone from a bullet wound in the apocalypse. I'm sure at this point, this happens so frequently that people are just armed with knowledge of how to take care of this stuff. But there's this implied medicinal backstory that I don't fully get. Even with what we're about to go into with this potential presumably neurological disorder that is affecting Frank. Frank plants the seed saying, who's going to come to our rescue? An MRI salesman, basically implying we don't even know what this is fully.
Yeah.
We need test results to identify what this is. Yet they're taking medications, which maybe they got them through Joel. I don't know. Joel does say that he hasn't been on this path. He said it's been 3 years since he went to this Cumberland Farms to get his stash. Right. So we can imagine that it's been 3 years since he's last seen Bill and Frank.
Mm,
If you're dealing with a neurological disorder, especially when you're not dealing with medical treatment, that is probably going to happen faster than 3 years.
mm.
The declination of health, declining of health, declination. Is that correct?
Let's go with
We're making up words today on the pod.
it.
I, I just, I don't know. It just felt like, even the way that he talks about them, like a roundy this, and it was cute and it was endearing,
Mm,
but it exemplified a lack of relationship with the medication. Or maybe it,
right.
it exemplified a way that they've quirkily, another word I'm making up, quirkily are, shining light on this situation. But again, how are they giving this man medication when they don't even know what it is fully? And where did they get this medication from? And where is this implied medicinal like knowledge? And again, this is bothers me the least because there probably is ways that they built up their medicinal staff. There's books that they can read to generally diagnose. And again, removing a bullet from a wound is something that I would imagine people at this state in society have some relationship with. But there is just this kind of medicinal thing that I'm just like, again, I don't know if I'm fully buying it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just that's just me. And
No,
I'll
no.
I'll leave it at that.
To be honest, I was the same. Like, we don't see, excuse me, like Frank, like understanding, like, how to take a bullet out of somebody. Like, we don't ever see any of this. And I know that
Yeah.
there's the conversation early when, like, you know, Joel does say to Bill, look, like, we should trade because we've got supplies to medications and everything like that within like where we are. But with the condition that Frank obviously goes on to develop, as his body is starting to weaken and break down, you need to see a doctor for diagnosis as to medication. Like he never goes to see a doctor. And like he can't just kind of, Bill can't just say to Joel, like through some type of message, oh, this is the type of symptoms he's got. Can you go and tell them to a doctor so that
Yeah.
they can get the right, that wouldn't happen. So there are a
Yeah.
few little plot holes with that.
Two things that would have solved some issues I had, and I don't know if the first one would be is shown anywhere and I just missed it. But like if we had seen like a forklift when Bill was going through the town, and then it's
Right.
kind of implied like that's what he used to stack up the cars, like something like that. Which I don't
Mm.
even know if a forklift would be strong enough, but maybe we
But
would see some piece of equipment, and maybe we did and I missed it. But with this, if hypothetically the show began and Joel had just gotten back from Bill and Frank's,
mm,
and he established that he was bringing them medication. There was like a subtle hint to it. Then it would make more sense to me.
right.
You know what I mean? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
there would be immediacy, there'd be a relationship with that seed being planted and dots being connected. But here again, how do we even know? It just
Yeah.
that's just me.
We're taking a lot on faith. We are.
Yes.
And we power through because we love these characters. We love the gays. Kind of what we've hinted at towards there. We then go 10 years later, so we're up to kind of present the year 2023. Frank's body's really starting to weaken. At this point, he's in a wheelchair. Bill's looking after him now. So obviously Bill didn't die, but we've got like a lot of visual clues here that, Frank's days are coming to an end like soon. He obviously is a painter. He used to paint pictures of like Bill and flowers and everything like that. And we
Mhm.
see the moment of when he's really struggling to finish this particular picture. It's just that the weakening of his body is literally starting to break down. And like he can't even open the bag of pills he needs to get. And as you said, he's having a drink through like a straw. He's having like soup to eat and everything like that. You see Bill putting him to bed, and then the next morning when Frank's like says, "Oh, it took me all night," but he's climbed out of bed and he's sitting in the wheelchair, and Bill's like, trying to put him back in bed, and he says, "Look, this will be my last day." And wow, like that moment of just taking ownership of like, you know, I'm going to go out the way that I want to go out. Like, there's no cure for this. And even like Bill's trying to talk him down and says, look, well, what if a doctor comes by or something? He's like, there is no door to door doctor that could help with this. There was no cure prior to this. There isn't going to be a cure now, you know? And then that's when he says the line, look, I've had more good days with you than anyone else. Like, give me one more good day. And I think that just sets up a lot of like the themes in the whole TV show as well of trying to find those good days within this horrific world that they now live in. And it's just beautifully played. It's a little bit foreshadowing as well of towards the end of the show potentially. But I just thought that was really powerful, really touching. And like he's taking ownership of how he is going to basically end his life.
Yeah. Bill sobbing on the couch
Oh,
got me.
yeah, same.
This was the moment in the episode in which my heart started to crack in half.
Mm.
And then someone was just feeding it to me as the episode went on. That's how I felt.
Right.
I thought it was powerful. It was beautiful. I love that he is losing feeling in his hands. I don't know if this is a correlative to the emphasis on the hands when you turn.
Mm.
Obviously, he's not infected, but I don't know if there was a correlative there. But also the idea that he's painting a picture and like half of the picture is just muddied and muddled
Yeah.
because of his lack of um, control of his appendages. And I thought that also was interesting that it's like almost this like he's looking at himself like it could be a self-portrait and how that is what's
Mm.
being distorted and he wants to maintain. I also love that they took this painting, and they put it in the frame when Ellie and Joel are
Yeah.
walking into that room at the end of the walking into the house, and how that was the last thing that was left up on the easel. And yeah, I just thought this whole part was beautiful. And it's the tone, it's again was one of those shifts where like it immediately jumps into Bill hysterically
Yeah.
crying. He just did such a great job. And then it was just such a poetic montage after this about them
Mm.
ending everything in such a stunning, nearly Romeo and Juliet romantic way.
Yeah.
um yeah, I mean there's not much more I can say other than like this up until the end of their last scene together was just, it was gut wrenching and it was stunning. And I wrote, the last thing I wrote on my paper, because this is kind of where I stopped taking notes because my emotions started getting a little too much. I wrote that this episode and these moments really helped me appreciate life. It
Mm.
it made me want to appreciate life leaving the episode. I was like,
Right.
wow, like there's so much to be grateful for. And for
Yeah.
one episode of a TV show to communicate that,
Beautiful.
so successful. Anyway, continue.
Absolutely. No, no, no. It's a beautiful point as well. It really does hang that kind of message in this episode really, really strongly. But I mean, yeah, like the montage that we get, when we see them like having breakfast, they go to the boutique, they get the fancy clothing on, they get married, they have the delicious dinner, and he says, then I want you to crush up the pills, pour them in my drink, and I want to fall asleep in your arms. And it was that line that hit me, just that falling asleep in his arms in their bed. Like that really, really hit me. Um, but I love that when we get to the dinner, it's a recreation of the first time they ever had a meal together. And this is the last time they're ever going to have a meal together. So, Bill comes out with the same rabbit dish, places it down, turns the plate the same way again. He gets the same wine out again, and like even turns it to Frank to show him. Frank even looks in acknowledgement, pours it. It was beautifully done. Like really, really lovely, really poetic. And again, we see him, brings the crushed pills in, stirs them up into Frank's drink. Frank downs it. And then it's that line where he says, why were there already pills in the bottle? And then we just know, like Bill just says, look, I'm old, I'm satisfied, and you are my purpose. And that line is so strong throughout this whole show, finding your purpose and finding that within people. And again, it's another parallel to Joel, where, in many ways, Tess was kind of like his purpose for a long time, his direction, his life, his guidance. And now that is in Ellie. She is his purpose in getting her to where he needs to get her to, but building that relationship with her. I just think that line is so beautiful and just really strong and just highlights not even just what's important about this episode, but what's important about the whole show.
Mm.
Finding your purpose and what it is that you want out of this world that you are living in. I just think that was beautiful. And then obviously he takes Frank up to bed, and that's the last that we ever see of Bill and Frank. And just beautiful.
Yeah, it was stunning. The use of music throughout this
Oh,
episode in terms of the score underlying the scenes was stunning. How when they are eating their last meal together, it's silent and there's
yeah.
these long pauses and they're simply looking at each other. It I mean, these are two exquisite actors
Mm,
at work. I mean, they really, I was completely enveloped within this
same.
world in this moment and the emotions that they were feeling and leading with and creating from. And it was really outstanding and it really moved me. And I couldn't stop thinking about this episode for days. It really, really
Same.
got to me. And I really like how this correlates to what you're saying correlates to the letter that is left and how Bill
Hmm.
establishes that he felt like he didn't have anything to live for.
Yeah.
And then he realized he did. And this is such a message to Joel because Joel has lost so much and
Yeah.
he is still losing. I affirm that I think he is mourning the loss of Bill and Frank and Tess. He's mourning the loss of his inner circle, the people that he looks forward to spending time with and seeing in this terrible, dilapidated world. I mean, there's no one else aside from Tommy, who at this point is a question mark in
Yeah.
Joel's life, that Joel has any emotional relationship with. And here is his friend saying to him, maybe more, whether he realizes it or not, to continue forth and find purpose in things, even when you feel like there's no hope left,
Mm.
and to place that purpose in what we can. Going back to what Tess says to Joel, save who you can,
Yeah.
even if that's yourself, right?
Hmm.
Like, even
Yeah.
if we have to save ourselves by finding love in the places that it's available, even if that love is conflated with dependency and it's not love in its purest form, but it's love based on relationship dynamic. There's this emphasis on, I think we're seeing a lot of these themes come fold into each other.
Hmm.
And I think this note exemplified a lot of that
Absolutely.
Bill leaves Joel. And I also like that it references the game, in which there's a note left that we read. Obviously, it's not the same note and it's not addressed the same way, but it's the same funny humor. I didn't even like you anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, he's like, I didn't like you, but we were kind of friends ish. And like even
Mm-hmm.
that funny laugh that he puts in when Ellie reads out the letter, and it's like, like all of that, just brilliant little moments of comedy and like what we've just seen, which is like diabolical emotionally. But yeah, like, as you said, like Ellie and Joel turn up and like we see the dying flowers outside, which is like
Mm-hmm.
symbology of like how he used to keep them alive and water them.
Yep.
And that's the first sign of when Joel looks and thinks something's not right here. And
Yeah.
then when they go in, like, there's a layer of dust left everywhere. We see the meals are still, the left of the food still left out on the table. There's dust everywhere. And then when she reads out the letter as well, this is August 29th, 2023. So it's like about a month, just under maybe, that they did this. Because we're in September, I believe, now. And then he says, like, that's in the letter when, Ellie's reading it out. And, he even says, that's why men like me and you are here. We're protectors, you know.
Mm.
And I love how Ellie stops when she says, use my weapons to keep, because the next word was Tess, and she just stopped. And obviously that's when Joel grabs the letter off her and like grabs the key, goes outside, checks in the garage. He sees the car. He also looks at the stuff to make the battery in the fridge and everything like that as well. It's just these little details, which some were overlooked, but when they do get them right, they were really, really good. Yeah, this is when he explains, where he says, right, Ellie, show me your arm. And again, it's that confirmation for Joel, right? This is my purpose. This is what I need to do. She's clearly, she was bitten. She hasn't turned. This is correct. And he's like, right, ground rules. This is what we're going to do. Tommy used to be a firefly. He might know people that are linked to other doctors who might be able to help you with this. We need to go and find Tommy. No more mentions of Tess. And also, don't tell anybody about your condition, and obviously do what I tell you to say, and like, this is like the direction basically of like, this is where we're going for the rest of the show now. We've had this beautiful moment of stillness with these two characters. Now we're back to the two main characters that we know. This is where we're going next. And then basically we kind of lead towards the end here where, they grab the supplies, they jump into the car, they start to drive away. Ellie finds the cassette, puts on the music. And then, this is beautiful where, oh, wait, before I do any of that, when Ellie's looking around, she gets to the dresser and she finds the gun. That's a really important thing to stress because she doesn't tell Joel about the gun. She sees it, she hears Joel coming, she quickly stashes it in her bag. And we know now Ellie's got that gun that she's been asking for, but not with Joel's permission. She's done it and gotten it herself. And obviously that comes back into the next episode as well.
Hmm.
But yeah, and then as I said, they get changed, they get showered. Sorry, yes, of course they do. They wear exactly the same clothing from the video game, which I thought was a really nice touch. Joel with the same shirt, Ellie with the same red t-shirt as well, which is lovely. Yeah, they kind of off they go. They get in Bill's van. They start to drive away. Ellie finds the cassette, puts it in. It's the same song, right? Which is what Bill played on, see, on the piano. And that was beautiful. And again, the way this episode ended with the camera, you see them in the distance, the camera's pulling out on the open window, which is what Bill referenced in the letter when he said, look, we've left the window open. I've locked the door. Please do not come in. Like, just leave that room. And then that camera shot of just it pulling back and seeing them drive away in the van and like the windows open, the wind's just blowing the curtain slightly. I mean, that is just beautiful. And it's a complete juxtaposition to where the episode started, where Bill was watching the outside world through screens, and yet we see the outside world through an open window here. And it just shows how far we've come and how things have changed there. It was just a beautiful ending with the song played again.
Mm, yeah. I love that the song again is being used as a narrative driving agent and how
Mm,
that is so integral to The Last of Us at large. But I also love how it revealed something maybe presumably romantic, that when Joel enters the garage and there's things all over the place to mess with the car, to build batteries, to fix things up, that is maybe a space of intimacy for Bill,
mm,
where this is a place where he gets to doll up his vehicle, because in many ways in the beginning of the episode we see that a he's very much a man in many
yeah,
ways. He has a lot of
yeah,
those isms that men traditionally have. And so, of all songs to be in the car that he might be working on or playing when he's working on it or driving around that town, it's the song that reminds him now of
right.
Frank. And I thought that was really sweet, if that was intended. But I thought the entire um, concluding half with Ellie and Joel was kind of the stamp on their relationship. Bill's note really convinces Joel this is what we're going to do. Joel
Mm,
decides he's going to take care of Ellie. He's going to see this through. He's going to do it. He obviously has a car now. He can take it to the road and figure it out. But this is when the momentum of Joel and Ellie's relationship really starts to drive forward.
absolutely. As we see,
Quite
obviously, in
literally.
episode. Yeah, actually, absolutely. Especially in the next episode as well, and what happens to them, which, they are relying on each other and nobody else from this point onwards. Especially in the next episode anyway, which is really integral. And obviously
Mm,
a little bit in episode 5 where we get introduced to other characters as well.
yeah. There is one more point I forgot to make, and it ties into to episode 5. But one of the rules that Joel has is to not show anyone her
Mm,
scar or her wound. And in episode 5, when she does that, something bad happens.
yeah, very, very true. Yeah, absolutely. We see the repercussions of breaking those rules. But yeah, I mean, for me, this episode was just perfection. It's one of the best moments of TV I've ever seen in my entire life. And that says a lot because I watch a lot of TV, but this was just stunningly beautiful. I love that, we had brief relief of like such a harsh and cruel world for a long period of time in this episode. We got to just envelop in this relationship between these two people, which was just beautifully played out. Like I love that we got to see so much humanity in a world that's lost so much, and that was beautifully done. I love that we see just them two coming together. As I said earlier, how like this pandemic has brought two people together in circumstances which would never have happened. We got really delve into this deep human psyche and just emotion, which again we never got to see in the video game, and that was just beautifully played out and just wonderful storytelling, fantastic acting, and honestly, this for me is one of, if not the strongest episode of the series I've seen yet.
I agree that it's one of the most moving pieces of television that I've ever watched.
Mm,
I haven't seen everything, but I do like TV as well. I like shows like this that are artistic, that are pieces of literature built in bite size for the
mm,
screen. To have captured and conveyed the Bill and Frank storyline over the span of maybe the 50 minutes sandwiched between the spots with Joel and Ellie, for
right.
that to have been captured it's unreal. The What I felt walking away from it, how
Yeah.
this took over the internet by storm.
Oh yeah.
People were so moved by this that they couldn't shut up. And obviously there was controversy surrounding it. What I would say is a lot of homophobic interpretations and reactions. as well as the supposed major deviation from the game. But ultimately, the biggest piece of conversation was how moving this was. And I
Yeah.
think it's just such a masterpiece.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it was a pleasure to come back to actually and watch again, to obviously record for what we're doing right now. It's just to, again, to go back to that and see all the little subtleties and see everything from a different perspective as well, and to kind of see other things that are there as well. It's just beautiful. And I think this will be landmark for a long time, as just a beautiful piece of television and storytelling. It really, really will. People will draw back to this a lot, and quite rightfully so, because it warrants it.
Yeah, I'm very confident this is going to win an Emmy.
Oh God, it has to. If not,
Very
tables will be
confident.
flipped. But yeah, Joey, so out of 10, what would
Mhm.
you give this episode?
I did strongly debate all of those little details that bothered me.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
I strongly took them into consideration because details matter. Frank said it.
Mm-hmm.
We show love. But I still think this is one of the greatest pieces of literature on screen that I've ever watched. And so I have to give it a 10 out of 10. I mean, is it absolutely perfect? Maybe not, but
Mm.
what is perfection in a post-apocalyptic world? I think that what it did was so grand that I can't give it less than a 10 because it was just so beautiful.
I absolutely agree. And I think I had 10 out of 10 as well written down on my paper. I was showing Joey there. For me, it's you can give things a perfect score 10 out of 10 and it can have imperfections in it. And I think that's a narrative that we really need to drive home. A lot of people kind of get so caught up on, you give this like 10 out of 10, but there's these little things wrong with it. And like, yes, that can be true, but the things that it does right, it doesn't just do right, but it does them in a way that is absolutely masterful. And the things that this episode does right aren't just good, they are perfection. And that's how you find the perfection in the episode for me. Of course, there's little things that, aren't great, or like we've brought them up in this episode, and that's fine. The episode obviously kind of talks about details, but it also does other stuff, which is the meat of the episode, which is just stunningly beautiful and stuff that we haven't seen on television probably ever. And that's what makes it so important. And that's for me, it's what you said earlier, Joey. Like when I first watched this episode, it sat with me for days. And when something does that for me, that is the mark of something imprinting successfully on me, where, you listen to an album that you love and it stays with you for so long. You watch a film and it stays with you, read a book, whatever it is. And that is the mark of me of great art. When something stays with you and you're still thinking about, you like almost like marinating in it like days later. That for me is the mark of brilliant art. And this is a mark of brilliant art.
Imprinting is the right word.
Absolutely. All right, Joey. So tell everybody where they can find your stuff and find you on the internet.
You can find my personal pages on all social media platforms at Joey Dean Official. And you can find my band, King Vagabond, on streaming platforms. Just search King Vagabond. And you can also find us on all social media platforms at The King Vagabond.
And there we go, everyone. So make sure you go check out Joey's stuff and also the incredible music of King Vagabond. But yes, we are available on all streaming platforms as well. So you can watch the video part of this on YouTube if you're not. But if you do just want to listen, we are on all streaming platforms as well. So if you just type Last Week on Podcast, you will find us on there. We are also on social media. So if you type in Last Week on Pod, you'll find us on Twitter and on Instagram. If you want to follow me personally, I am at Strawn87. Again, that's on Twitter, Instagram, basically just type that in, you'll see my face. So again, thank you, Joey, so much for going through this with me. This is one of the episodes I was really looking forward to talking, with you about, because it's just brilliant. And yeah, I'm loving this journey with you and I can't wait to continue on.
Me too. I'm excited to talk about some intense episodes that are coming out.
Oh boy. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, thank you again, everybody, for listening. Looking forward to jumping in next week with episode 4. But until next time, take care.